Imagine if I told you that evolution doesn't always take millions of years. What if environmental factors could accelerate genetic changes in ways that completely defy everything we think we know about biology? What if there were creatures living in our forests right now that represent the next step in evolutionary development, and we're only just beginning to discover them? The story I'm about to share with you sounds like science fiction, but I promise you, every word is true. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why scientists around the world are calling this the most important biological discovery of the 21st century. Meet Rebecca Chen, a 28-year-old software engineer from Portland who spends most of her weekends hiking in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. Rebecca's not just a casual day hiker. She's serious about it. She's completed sections of the Pacific Crest Trail, climbed Mount Hood 3 times, and knows the wilderness areas around Mount Jefferson better than most park rangers. She's the kind of person who can identify bird calls from 50 yards away and tell you which plants are edible and which ones will make you sick. It was a crisp Saturday morning in early October when Rebecca set out on what she thought would be a routine solo hike in the Opal Creek Wilderness area, about 60 miles east of Salem. She'd hiked this particular trail dozens of times before, but October is her favorite month because the old-growth Douglas firs and western hemlocks create this incredible cathedral of golden light as the autumn sun filters through the canopy. Rebecca was about 4 miles into the trail, crossing a small creek on a fallen log, when she heard something that stopped her dead in her tracks. It wasn't a normal forest sound, not a bird call or a squirrel chattering. It was a high-pitched whimpering, almost like a human baby crying, but somehow different, more desperate, more urgent. Following the sound, Rebecca pushed through a thicket of Oregon grape and salmonberry bushes until she found the source. There, trapped under a fallen branch near the base of a massive cedar tree, was what appeared to be a very young animal. At first glance, Rebecca thought it might be a baby raccoon, or maybe a young opossum. It was about the size of a kitten, covered in grayish-brown fur and clearly in distress. The fallen branch wasn't huge, but it was heavy enough to pin the little creature's hind leg. Rebecca carefully lifted the branch and gently scooped up the injured animal. It didn't try to bite or scratch, which surprised her. Most wild animals, especially when hurt and scared, would be aggressive. But this little guy just looked up at her with these remarkably bright, almost luminescent eyes and made soft, chirping sounds that seemed almost like it was trying to communicate gratitude. Rebecca wrapped the creature in her fleece jacket and examined it more closely. The fur was incredibly soft and dense, much finer than you'd expect on a raccoon or a possum. The tail was bushy but not ringed like a raccoon's. The ears were pointed and mobile, constantly swiveling to track sounds. But the most unusual feature was the creature's paws. They were more delicate and finger-like than typical mammal paws, with what looked like tiny thumbs. The nearest veterinary clinic was back in Salem, almost a 2-hour drive from the trailhead. But Rebecca could see that the animal's leg was definitely injured, possibly broken, and it was clearly dehydrated and weak. She made the decision to cut her hike short and get this little creature to professional help as quickly as possible. Dr. Michael Torres runs a mixed practice in Salem that treats both domestic pets and wildlife. He's licensed as a wildlife rehabilitator and has worked with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife on various conservation projects. When Rebecca showed up at his clinic with her mysterious forest foundling, Dr. Torres thought he'd seen everything Oregon's forests had to offer. He was wrong. The moment Dr. Torres examined the creature, he knew he was looking at something he'd never encountered before. In his 15 years of practice, he'd treated practically every species native to the Pacific Northwest. Black bears, cougars, elk, dozens of bird species, every kind of small mammal you could imagine. This animal didn't match any of them. The bone structure was unusual, more delicate than a raccoon, but with proportions that didn't match any known North American mammal. The skull was broader relative to body size, suggesting a larger brain capacity. The dentition was interesting too. Sharp enough for meat, but also flat surfaces for grinding plant material, indicating an omnivorous diet. But the most remarkable feature was the creature's nervous system response during the examination. It seemed to anticipate Dr. Torres's movements, almost like it could sense what he was going to do before he did it. Dr. Torres set the fractured leg and provided pain medication, but he also took tissue samples for genetic analysis. Something about this animal was nagging at him, some quality he couldn't quite identify. The way it looked at him during the examination, the intelligence in those bright eyes, the calm way it accepted treatment, it all suggested cognitive abilities far beyond what you'd expect from such a young animal. Rebecca agreed to foster the creature during its recovery, setting up a comfortable habitat in her spare bedroom. She named it Sage, after the sagebrush that grows throughout Oregon's high desert regions. Dr. Torres estimated that Sage was probably only about 6 weeks old based on tooth development and size, which meant it would need feeding every few hours and constant care. That's when Rebecca started noticing things that didn't make sense. Sage learned to use a litter box within hours, without any training. It figured out how to open cabinet doors by watching Rebecca do it once. When Rebecca brought home different types of food to try, Sage would sniff each option and then arrange them in order of preference, almost like it was conducting its own taste test. But the really weird stuff started happening after Sage had been with Rebecca for about 2 weeks. The first incident involved Rebecca's cat, a normally antisocial tabby named Douglas, who barely tolerated Rebecca, let alone strange animals. Instead of hissing or hiding from Sage, Douglas became completely fascinated by the little creature. Rebecca would find them sitting together, perfectly still, just staring at each other for minutes at a time. It was like they were having conversations she couldn't hear. Then Rebecca's houseplant started growing faster, a lot faster. The pothos in her living room, which had been struggling for months, suddenly exploded with new growth. Her herb garden on the balcony began producing vegetables at an impossible rate. Rebecca's a rational person with an engineering background. She doesn't believe in mystical nonsense. But she couldn't explain what was happening to her plants since Sage arrived. The growth accelerated when Sage began exploring Rebecca's apartment on its own. Its broken leg had healed remarkably quickly. Dr. Torres said he'd never seen bone regeneration that fast in such a young animal. But as Sage became more mobile, Rebecca noticed that its fur was changing color. Not gradually, like seasonal coat changes in some animals, but dramatically and in patterns that seemed to shift based on its mood or environment. When Sage was calm and content, its fur would take on this beautiful silvery green color that seemed to shimmer in the light. When it was excited or playful, bright golden streaks would appear along its back and tail. But the most remarkable change happened when Sage was sleeping. Its entire coat would shift to a deep, iridescent blue that seemed to pulse gently, like it was synchronized with the creature's heartbeat. Rebecca started documenting these changes with her phone, taking hundreds of photos and videos. She also began keeping a detailed journal of Sage's behavior, growth, and the weird things happening around her apartment. The entries from those first few weeks read like a fantasy novel, but Rebecca is meticulous about recording only what she actually observed. By the 6-week mark, Sage had grown to about the size of a small cat, but its proportions remained unusual. The legs were longer relative to its body size, and it moved with an almost feline grace. Its tail had become incredibly expressive, not just for balance, but apparently for communication. Sage could make its tail rigid and pointed when it wanted Rebecca's attention, curl it into specific shapes that seemed to convey different emotions, and even use it to manipulate objects with remarkable precision. But the most unsettling development was Sage's apparent ability to influence other animals. Rebecca first noticed this during walks in her neighborhood. Dogs would stop mid-stride and stare at Sage with intense focus. Birds would gather in unusual numbers, perching silently on nearby branches and watching as Rebecca and Sage passed by. Even urban wildlife seemed drawn to them. Raccoons, possums, even coyotes would emerge from hiding spots just to observe this strange little creature. Dr. Torres had been monitoring Sage's development through regular checkups, and he was as baffled as Rebecca by what they were witnessing. The genetic analysis results had come back inconclusive. Sage's DNA contained markers from several different mammalian families, but in combinations that shouldn't be possible through natural hybridization. It was like looking at a genetic remix of multiple species. That's when Dr. Torres reached out to his colleague, Dr. Amanda Foster, a geneticist and evolutionary biologist at Oregon State University. Dr. Foster specializes in environmental impacts on genetic expression. particularly how pollutants and radiation can cause rapid evolutionary changes in wildlife populations. When Dr. Torres showed her the genetic analysis and Rebecca's documentation of Sage's development, Dr. Foster immediately requested to examine the creature in person. The meeting between Dr. Foster and Sage was unlike anything Rebecca had expected. The moment Dr. Foster entered Rebecca's apartment, Sage became incredibly alert and focused. It approached the scientist without fear and seemed to be studying her with the same intensity that she was studying it. Dr. Foster later described the encounter as feeling like she was being evaluated by an intelligence far more sophisticated than she'd anticipated. Dr. Foster's examination revealed even more extraordinary characteristics. Sage's brain activity, measured through non-invasive scanning equipment, showed patterns unlike any known mammalian species. The neural complexity was more similar to that of highly intelligent birds like crows or parrots, but in a mammalian brain structure. Even more remarkably, certain areas of Sage's brain were showing activity in electromagnetic frequencies that Dr. Foster had never encountered in biological systems. The electromagnetic activity became the key to understanding what was happening. Dr. Foster theorized that Sage's species, whatever it was, had developed the ability to communicate and possibly influence other animals through bioelectrical fields. This would explain the behavioral changes in other animals around Sage, the accelerated plant growth, and even some of the color changes in its fur. But Dr. Foster needed to understand where Sage came from and whether there were others like it. She convinced Rebecca to take her back to the exact location where Sage had been found, bringing along sensitive equipment to test for environmental factors that might explain these remarkable adaptations. The return trip to Opal Creek Wilderness revealed the answer they'd been looking for, but it was more disturbing than any of them had expected. Using ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis equipment, Dr. Foster's team discovered something that wasn't supposed to be there. Traces of radioactive material buried about 10 feet underground, directly beneath the area where Rebecca had found Sage. Historical research revealed that the site had been used for classified military testing in the 1950s and early 1960s. Small-scale experiments involving low-level radioactive materials had been conducted throughout the Cascade Mountains as part of early nuclear research programs. Most of these sites had been cleaned up or sealed, but apparently some had been forgotten or inadequately documented. The radioactive material wasn't dangerous to humans at current exposure levels, but it had been affecting local wildlife for decades. Dr. Foster's theory was that a population of small mammals, probably a species of tree squirrel or marten, had been exposed to low-level radiation over multiple generations. Instead of causing typical genetic damage, the exposure had somehow accelerated evolutionary development in ways that produced the remarkable creature Rebecca had rescued. But Sage wasn't alone. Over the following months, Dr. Foster's team documented at least 12 other individuals of the same species living in the remote areas around the contaminated site. They'd evolved not just physical adaptations, but complex social behaviors and communication systems that allowed them to coordinate activities across large distances. The implications were staggering. Here was proof that evolution could occur much faster than previously thought when driven by specific environmental pressures. These creatures had developed capabilities that bordered on the supernatural, bioelectrical communication, influence over other species, rapid tissue regeneration, and problem-solving abilities that rivaled those of primates. Dr. Foster published her findings in the journal Nature, sparking intense debate in the scientific community. Some researchers praised the discovery as revolutionary evidence of accelerated evolution. Others questioned whether the creatures represented a new species or were highly unusual variants of known animals. The debate continues, but what's undeniable is that Sage and its relatives represent something unprecedented in mammalian evolution. Meanwhile, Sage continued to thrive in Rebecca's care, growing to about the size of a medium dog but retaining its remarkable intelligence and abilities. It learned to respond to dozens of verbal commands, could operate simple electronic devices, and seemed to understand human emotions with uncanny accuracy. Rebecca often felt like she was living with a highly intelligent alien rather than a rescued forest animal. The most remarkable development came when Sage was about 8 months old. Rebecca had taken it back to visit the Opal Creek area, hoping that familiar scents and sounds might trigger some kind of instinctual behavior. What happened instead was like something out of a science fiction movie. As soon as they arrived at the original rescue site, Sage became incredibly animated, making complex vocalizations that Rebecca had never heard before. Within minutes, other members of its species began emerging from the forest, not just one or two, but more than a dozen individuals of various sizes and ages. They gathered in a loose circle around Rebecca and Sage, completely unafraid of human presence. Dr. Foster, who had accompanied them on this trip, watched in amazement as the creatures seemed to conduct some kind of group communication session. Their fur patterns synchronized, shifting through the same sequence of colors in perfect coordination. The electromagnetic readings from Dr. Foster's equipment went off the charts, indicating intense bioelectrical activity among the group. The gathering lasted for almost an hour, with Sage appearing to serve as some kind of intermediary between the wild population and the humans. Rebecca later described feeling like she was witnessing a diplomatic meeting between species, with Sage explaining human intentions and the wild creatures evaluating whether humans could be trusted. When the meeting ended, the wild creatures melted back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. But something had changed. Over the following weeks, Rebecca and Dr. Foster began receiving reports from hikers and forest workers of unusual animal behavior throughout the Cascade Mountains. Animals that normally avoided human contact were approaching hikers peacefully. Predator and prey species were being observed in close proximity without aggression. It was as if some kind of communication network had been established throughout the forest ecosystem. Dr. Foster's research team documented these changes over the following months, and their findings were even more extraordinary than anyone had imagined. Sage's species appeared to function as biological ambassadors, capable of facilitating communication between different animal species and even between wildlife and humans. They had evolved not just individual intelligence, but collective consciousness that could influence entire ecosystems. The discovery has profound implications for our understanding of evolution, consciousness, and the interconnectedness of natural systems. It suggests that environmental pressures can drive not just physical adaptations, but the development of entirely new forms of biological communication and cooperation. Rebecca still lives with Sage, who has become not just her companion, but a bridge between human civilization and the natural world. Scientists from around the globe visit her apartment to study this remarkable creature, and the research continues to reveal new capabilities and behaviors that challenge everything we thought we knew about the limits of animal intelligence. The story of Rebecca and Sage has changed how we think about our relationship with nature and raised profound questions about what other evolutionary marvels might be developing in environments we've altered through human activity. It's a reminder that nature is far more adaptable and intelligent than we ever imagined, and that sometimes our mistakes can lead to developments that are more wonderful than we could have planned. Sage represents hope that life finds a way not just to survive environmental challenges, but to evolve beyond them in ways that create new possibilities for cooperation and understanding between species. In a world where we often focus on environmental destruction and species extinction, this little creature from the Oregon forests shows us that evolution is still writing new chapters, and some of them might be more amazing than anything we've seen before. So the next time you're hiking in the wilderness and you encounter an animal that seems a little too intelligent, a little too aware, pay attention. You might be witnessing the next step in evolutionary development, happening right before your eyes in forests and wild places around the world. If this incredible story of evolution in action amazed you as much as it did me, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our explorations of nature's most incredible mysteries. And let me know in the comments, do you think we're witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in evolution where environmental challenges create new forms of intelligence rather than just extinction?